Well, first of all, welcome everybody to another Open Dialogus conversation. As you know, we're having these regular weekly discussions, and hopefully with the intention of casting a little bit of light on some of the darkness, on some of the big topics of the day. So I'm particularly pleased to be joined by a stellar panel we have with us today. And just to introduce them in no particular order, can I welcome George Galloway to the stream? I'm sure most of you know George. George is a former parliamentarian. George is a renowned orator. George is a radio host. A man of many talents. George also has been, of course, prominent in advocating for Brexit. So you're very welcome to the stream, George. Peter, all the way from Sweden, home of ABBA and other good things. I'm a big ABBA fan, by the way, Peter. Just throw that one in, especially Agnetha. So Peter's a member of the Swedish Democrats. I think, Peter, you've been in the European Parliament from 2014, as I understand it, or thereabouts. And obviously, you're a member of the European Conservative and Reformist Association or group. I think you're one of the vice chairs of that. So it'd be really interesting to get your take and stuff and where this one's going from, if you like, an EU perspective. And then we've got a couple of UKIP redoubtables in this one here. We've got Godfrey Bloom. I'm very pleased to welcome Godfrey on the stream. Godfrey was in the European Parliament, I think, from 2004, Godfrey, to 2014, thereabouts.
That's right.
Yeah, and of course you were a very early and prominent voice to get the United Kingdom unshackled from the European Union. And finally, one of our regulars here on Open Dialogus, and that's Bill Etheridge, who of course himself is a former UKIP MEP for the West Midlands. You're very welcome as well to the stream, Bill. Right, let's kick off. George, let's start with you. So, you know, this was going to be the year of Brexit. Just over a year ago, Boris Johnson got himself elected with a whopping majority on the basis he was going to deliver Brexit. So, almost 1 year on, where do you think we are?
Well, on one level, we're on the eve of leaving. The 31st of December is just around the corner. And as I've been waiting for this since 1975, I'm looking forward to it as the completion, to some extent, of a very long and sometimes lonely fight, especially on the left of politics in later decades. But on another level, of course, it's a disappointment that it seems likely to me that the Brexit we'll sign for is not the Brexit that we wanted, that we voted for, that Boris Johnson promised in the thumping majority election to which you have just referred. And now, of course, we have this very large spanner thrown into the works by Joe Biden's apparent. I stress apparent because it's not over till the fat lady sings, and there are one or two fat ladies that Donald Trump has put into the Supreme Court. They might sing yet, but it seems likely that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, and that undoubtedly strengthens the negotiating hand of the bureaucracy in Brussels and weakens the negotiating hand of Boris Johnson. So I'm expecting imminently an agreement with the European Union, which falls to a considerable degree short of the agreement that we should have and that we could have. So my enjoyment of the New Year's Eve will be tempered by the sense of an opportunity lost. I think that Boris Johnson fannied around for far too long. The Tories fannied around for far too long on this Brexit issue, and we're therefore not going to get the Brexit we deserve.
Yeah, thanks, George. Well, actually, Godfrey, just turning to you on that one, and further to to George's point, you've obviously been fighting for Brexit for a long time as well. So, do you share George's analysis and his concerns that, yeah, we're on the eve of it, but is it going to be that which we really wanted to see, or is it going to be something more diluted? What do you think, Godfrey?
I think George is absolutely right. The problem that we have is that the Conservative Party are the party of Europe. They took us into Europe, they kept us in Europe. Most Conservative MPs and most Conservative members of the House of Lords are Remainers. And the let's get Brexit done routine that we went through this time last year for an election was frankly, I think, bogus. I don't think this has got very much to do with anything about Joe Biden coming in or not, where I do perhaps disagree with George on that one. We've got to bear in mind, and I speak as a research economist by profession, not a professional politician, I'm a research economist.
Yeah.
Our biggest single country trading partner is the United States by quite a long way. And we are investors in the United States, and we are exporters to the United States of goods and services. So we're very strong trade-wise with the United States, whether we had a trade agreement or not. Now, personally, I don't believe in trade agreements. I think trade agreements are a bad thing all round. Trade agreements are for the benefits of banks, big businesses, and politicians and bureaucrats. The little guy doesn't get anything out of a trade agreement. It's a stitch up by the big shots, which is why politicians and civil service negotiate them. They don't send clever businessmen to negotiate them. There's always a trade-off. And of course, the trade-off that we have is coming through with the European Union it isn't about trade. It's never been about trade. It's about a European federal centralist state, single state. And we continue in this country to talk about it, although it's about trade, because we remember the common market. And I tried to explain this at Exeter University a few years ago. It's got nothing to do with trade. It's a political ideal. And until we get that through our thick heads in this country, we're never going to make any progress.
Okay, well, that's interesting, Godfrey. We'll explore some of those points as well. Peter, from your point of view, because you're outside the UK and our internal stresses on this one, how do you see Brexit at this particular point, which is like, what, 6 weeks or so away from, or 6 or 7 weeks to the date in which, either we come to a deal with the EU or whatever you want to call it. How do you see things stacking up?
Well, to be honest, it's quite a disappointment. I mean, I've always been on the Brexit side. I campaigned in the UK together with Nigel. I visited Bill. We had meetings in pubs and public places, and everything was all the time about a hard Brexit, leaving without any ties to the European Union afterwards. And it's a bit of a disappointment to see now that you will not really get out of the claws of the European Union. And for me, the United Kingdom became like the beacon of hope, pretty much, that it's actually possible to leave the European Union. And it's actually, we will set a benchmark pretty much for other EU skepticals like me to be able to tell my citizens at home in Sweden that, look at the UK, look what they did. They left the European Union. They are still alive, they are doing well, they are prospering, and the country is okay, without any problem. What the European Union tried to do now is to tie you still against them, because they know, and this is their biggest fear, I would say, that you will leave and you will be successful outside the European Union. That is nothing they can allow to happen, because, to be honest, then there's no reason for any country to stay within the European Union. So they are now trying to still have a grip about you, so you cannot leave. We are talking, for example, about the fishery waters. Of course, when you have left the cooperation with the European Union, United Kingdoms should decide themselves over the fishery waters. And now they don't want you to do that. And they are giving in also from the UK negotiation team on this. And I think they should have a really firm foot down the ground. We are not moving. This is it.
So actually, just following on from that point then, Bill, people often refer to the European Union as it's Hotel California. You can check out, but you never leave. And further to what Peter's just said, is that your sense of things? Are we checking out, but are we fundamentally not leaving? What do you think, Bill?
I remember turning up to the Parliament after the referendum and being greeted by people from all round of Europe, different MEPs coming up to me and congratulating me and saying, thank you, you've given us some hope. And Peter's voice on that is something that's been repeated time and time again. It was emotional, and I could see the Federalists terrified, and I could see the Patriots delighted. And over the course of time, the EU have reasserted themselves. And to go back to what George said about fannying about in the government, I actually don't believe that it was an accidental thing. I actually think that what was going on during Theresa May's time was that they were deliberately holding off on doing a trade deal with America, deliberately holding off and getting tighter to them. I was in Washington 3 times during that period, and I had people close to the Trump administration actually come up to me and say, will you get your government to speak to us? I mean, how extraordinary, a UKIP MEP being approached by the people close to the leadership of the United States saying your British government won't speak to us. This, in my opinion, was deliberate. Fifth columnists within the Conservative Party, as Godfrey says, they are the party of Europe, and I believe that they've deliberately done this so we get to a point where we don't have such a friendly US president.
Interesting. George, you were the first one to bring up the, if you like, the kind of what's happened in the past week or so with the US presidential election and the fact that, you know, it is likely that Joe Biden will become the next president. And he's clearly much more EU focused, or he appears to be more EU focused than Donald Trump certainly was. And you know, but yet from 2016 until now, we've had a president in the White House who was pretty keen to get a deal done, whether you like it or not, people like deals or not, but Trump wanted to get a deal done with the UK. Theresa May messed around, George, for 3 years or whatever. So do you think that the Biden elevation to president could significantly change things, even in this short time we've got left, or do you think a lot of it's media hype? What do you say, George?
Well, first, I agree with Bill entirely that in the Theresa May period, it was indeed deliberate. They were hoping, like Micawber, that something would turn up to frustrate Britain's Brexiting. And so we're on the same page on that. But I also think that Boris Johnson has fannied around. This deal, I take Godfrey's point about deals, but if it is held that a deal with the US would have been good, well, we could have had it, should have had it. And it's passing strange that Boris Johnson, who would not be in power but for Brexit, would not have won the election last year in the way that he did, but for Brexit, that he did not drive on urgently with the looming presidential election in November of 2020. He must have known there was a possibility that a less friendly US president would emerge, and that seems to have happened. Again, seems to have happened. I've not accepted the results yet until, as I say, the fat lady sings. But I think it's more than just media hype, I must say. The enmity between the Obama-Biden administration and Britain as a whole, for a whole range of historical reasons. It was said famously that Johnson had the view that Obama's Kenyan antecedents were a reason why he didn't look fondly on Britain. If that's true, then undoubtedly Joe Biden's Irish antecedents, albeit his people left Ireland in 1841, but as someone of Irish background myself, I can tell you that centuries make no difference in that feeling. So Kenya plus Ireland, plus a liking for the globalization dream that the European Union represents, the antipathy to independence of European states, or other states for that matter, they all add up to a problem for us. Now, of course, there's not much time for Biden, not yet in office in any case, to affect things, but I wouldn't mind betting that the spines of the European negotiators have been substantially stiffened by the imminence of a Biden administration, and correspondingly, the morale of the British negotiators has commensurately shrunk.
Yeah, I think those are very fair points. I mean, Godfrey, just on that one there, it is a peculiar thing, like George says, that clearly Boris is the only reason he's prime minister is because he said he would get Brexit done and all of that, and he's had certainly over almost 12 months to be pushing forward again, as per George's comments, to use the Trump relationship to get us into a good shape. But he hasn't done that, has he? I mean, he's been curiously sort of missing in action. Now, I know we've had this other thing called COVID-19, but on Brexit, I don't know what you think, but I think Boris is kind of man overboard. Where has he gone?
We've got to understand that Boris is not a conviction politician like David Cameron. He blows with the wind. He doesn't really, he stands four square for nothing particular. And of course, up until relatively recently, he was writing very long arguments in the Daily Telegraph why he did the EU, but we should remain. And then, being a political chancer, he looked at it and he thought, just a minute, if I come down strong on Brexit and supporting Brexit, I will get into number 10. And like David Cameron, his ambition since he was at Oxford, and I never quite know why it's always Oxford. I think perhaps freshmen get a lobotomy as soon as they get there, because as soon as they leave Oxford, they seem to have no common sense whatsoever left. So he is not a conviction politician. He doesn't really deeply believe in Brexit, and consequently, that's why he hasn't driven it through. And he, like, as I say, like David Cameron, is sitting in number 10. His ambition has been achieved. Now, the panel here today, albeit left and right, it's a mix, but every one of us, if we were in number 10, our conviction, we would want to do something, not just be there. These people just want to be prime minister. They don't want to do anything as prime minister. And that's the problem. And of course, the establishment, Trump was the exception, don't forget, the establishment in America is pro-EU. It is a CIA game. The European Union, if you go back in history, go back to post-war, the Americans believe, having had to come into 2 European wars, that this was a way to stop them having to bail out European squabbles. So it's a very deeply held motivation by the CIA that they want, which is why they pump money in secretly into the Remain campaign and on all these things, and this is what they've done. So the American establishment is just like our establishment. It's just the same. They believe in big government with the veneer of democracy, with an election every 4 or 5 years, to give people who are rather gullible the idea that they have a say in how they're governed. because the people on this panel know that simply isn't true. So I'm afraid we're stuck with it. We will end up, as I've said this for nearly 25 years, and I've said it since 2016, we will end up with a form of associate membership of the European Union. Certainly not what we voted for. George Galloway is quite right. It's not what we voted for, but the light at the end of the tunnel, the game is nearly over for the European Union. They're broke. The ECB is broke. The economies are broke. The Italian economy is broke. The French economy is broke. All the banks are broke. We've seen Deutsche Bank shares fall by 90% in the last 3 years. It's over. It's over. It really doesn't matter what comes out of these Mickey Mouse negotiations. In a few years' time, the whole thing will come down, as all empires do.
Well, I mean, on that positive note, Godfrey, turning to you for a second, Peter. I mean, obviously, the UK desire to be a sovereign nation and make its own sort of way in the world in the future is one that I guess is shared in other nations around the European Union. So when you hear us talk about well, we're going to remain sort of semi-associated with the EU, and I think you touched on this in your initial comments, Peter. Is that depressing, or does that cheer you up that we're going to be semi-detached to the EU, having voted to leave it?
No, it's depressing. It's really depressing, because this was not what we was fighting for. I include myself in the people fighting for the Brexit. I constantly made speeches about this in the Parliament, and as I said, I took part of election campaigning also in UK, and it was with great happiness I could see that the Brexiteers won. It was such a lovely morning to wake up, and we had also a gathering with all the UK MEPs outside the Commission House when the papers were signed that you were actually leaving. And I said at that time to a reporter from the BBC, smell the air. Don't you feel that little smell of freedom? Finally, we can smell a little freedom coming. And I've been hoping so much for this to be a success, to make it possible to use it also campaigning here in my own home country. But really, you will be tied up to the European Union with papers and contracts, and you don't have that freedom that we actually initially were fighting for all the time. So many people were fighting for this, and so many of the people in UK, they voted for this. Well, the thing was, of course, that this is not what the British people voted for. And this is not what the British MEPs for that was working for the Brexit was working for. You are in a way halfway in, halfway out, and that is something no one of the sides wanted. I mean, the Remain side, they wanted to stay in. Now the Leave side wanted to leave, and now it's like a half-half situation. So it's quite depressing that we didn't achieve, or you didn't achieve, what the aim was set for.
Well, Bill, on that note, I mean, do you think that the majority of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, the majority of British people, do you think they'll be sort of happy to settle for something that isn't quite what perhaps we originally thought we were going to get? But if Boris kind of bluffs it enough, do you think that's going to work okay? Or what do you think?
Well, not once during all the time when I was travelling the country campaigning on that referendum, and several occasions where Peter was kind enough to come and help us, a great friend of our country, not once did anyone say to me, well, I'd like to leave, but it all depends if we can get a deal and what kind of deal. Nobody said that. Everyone said, we want to leave. Now, what happened is that the Conservatives, seeing that the tide was against them, have hijacked the whole idea of Brexit so that they can remain in office, because that's what they do. That's why they're the most successful political party in history. They change to suit the mood of the time. And what I fear is that we will get this half in, half out, not really Brexit situation. And then the spin machine goes into hyperdrive. We get some more corny phrases and sayings rammed down our throats every 2 minutes. I mean, Boris and Cummings and co are very good at that. And people start to believe that we've left, even when we haven't. And there's a real danger of that. And I think it's down to people like those of us on this stream to highlight to people that they're being lied to. We are not getting the Brexit we campaigned for or they voted for. And we need to highlight that over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, George, just on that, I mean, there's certainly degrees of concern being expressed by the panelists here as to exactly what we are going to get, and I think it's an interesting point that Bill made, that, you know, ultimately people just voted to leave. We wanted out, and this trade deal, and several of us have talked about trade deals. This does seem to have kind of become the be all and end all. I mean, what's your thoughts? Does it matter if we get a trade deal?
No, it would be better to have no deal than a trade deal that ties us in perpetuity to the European Union. It's a rearguard action that has been fought, particularly in the Theresa May period, but continued in the Boris Johnson era. It's an attempt to recover some of the ground that they lost in the referendum, which is why people like me and others on this platform demanded that we leave immediately in 2014. I myself said that night on talk radio that we should send them an email, and I even kindly wrote the email for them, that we have decided to leave. We bear you no ill will. We trust you bear none towards us. Our intention is to have standards in this country, no less than yours, but they will be standards that we ourselves will decide upon and not dictated to us from outside. And we could have, should have done that. I should say, though, I'm a little less pessimistic, I think, than the rest of our guests. I don't think it's true that it will be half in, half out. It'll be more than half out, and therefore less than half in. But there will be key areas where we'll be let down, particularly our fishing communities, I feel sure. The Irish question will be more complicated. I speak as a supporter of Irish unity myself, but that's a matter not for Michel Barnier and not for Joe Biden, for that matter. So the final outcome will leave a bit of a taste, a bad taste in the mouth, I think, but it won't spoil the dinner entirely. We will still be largely, overwhelmingly actually, out of the EU. And insofar as we have allowed them to place booby traps behind our lines, well, in the future, a new generation of political leaders in Britain will have to seek to defuse them.
I think, George, that's an those are interesting observations. Godfrey, I mean, I would put it to you that, following on from what George has said, I think some of those laying the booby traps have been within the British establishment, and particularly within, you know, so it's very hard to fight a war, Godfrey, when some of your own side are actually colluding with, if you like, the enemy. So I just wonder, you know, what your thoughts are with regard to that.
Yes, we had this actually in the wars of against the Sun King and the Duke of Marlborough. The Duke of Marlborough, one of our greatest generals, had to constantly look over his shoulder for deals that were being done in London with the French, largely to satisfy the monetary aspect. of wars. And so, yes, this isn't new in our history. And of course, as far as the political dynamic is concerned, this is not unlike the post-1840s reform bills that went through, when people thought that the franchise was going to be significantly extended and ordinary people were going to get a say. That really didn't happen at all. That really didn't happen until the early 1920s, you see. So history is history always repeats itself in a mutated form. What is interesting, I sat on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee for 5 years. I was the only chap on it, incidentally, who even remotely understood money and banking. But I did speak against our support or membership of the European Investment Bank. It's on my website for everybody to see. I couldn't get the press interested, and I tried to explain that this would put us on the hook for a lot of money further down the line, because the European Union is fundamentally run by bankers and money. And that's, again, this is something that people don't understand. We talk about imports and exports and tariffs. The bankers run it. The bankers run it. Now, we are on the hook at the moment, and Brexit isn't going to make any difference to this, incidentally. We're going to be on the, even if we got the sort of the full Monty, pretty much, we're on the hook for somewhere in the region of £45 billion for our capital asset association with the European Central Bank and the European Investment Bank. Now, we also have an interesting dynamic that the entire mainstream media in this country, the entire, certainly televisual mainstream media, is pro-Remain and have been pro-Remain, and they don't even pretend to hide it. They don't even pretend to hide it. It's the most extraordinary thing, and the sooner we get rid of public service broadcasting, the better. It's totally skewed. But what I don't understand, and I'm sort of just agreeing a bit here from a different direction with George Galloway, it's going to be very difficult for mainstream media to hide in the coming years the amount of money that we still have to pay. We can talk about fishing till we're blue in the mouth, or the common agricultural policies, and we are going to be writing substantial checks for the next few years to rescue the European Central Bank and the European Investment Bank, which is very deep in the hole because they've squandered an awful lot of money. How are mainstream media going to hide that, although they don't have any serious economic journalists? There are two in the country, Alistair Heath and Liam Halligan, and they do actually understand how money and banking work. Nobody else does. But I don't know how they're going to hide these billions for the next few years they're going to be pouring out to rescue the banks. And of course, I've spoken out against banks. My career in the European Parliament, I had over 40 or 50 million views on my speeches attacking banks. And I said in one of my speeches, which got 25 million views, and still we start hanging some bankers, things are not going to get any better.
Well, I'm not necessarily in favour of actually capital punishment for the banking class, but I do take your point, Godfrey. That and it's actually, isn't it interesting that some of these topics do unite us, whether we come from from left or from right or from centre. We can see
nothing to do with left or right, David. This is nothing to do with left or right. That's over. It's yesterday's argument.
Yeah, no, I agree. But on the subject of finance and of trade, and this is for you, Peter. I just wanted to bring this one up. In the event of there being a no deal, if there was a no trade deal by the end of the year, then what happens is the WTO tariffs instantly kick in. Now, one of the things that amazes me in this one is that the EU has so much more to lose than the UK, because the tariffs on certain types of imports, and I know this as a business person, would be considerable. If I was living in, Germany, or if I was in France, I would be panicking, because I'm thinking, gosh, my bottle of wine or my Mercedes car or whatever it is, those things are going to attract substantive tariffs, which could significantly impact my sales. So it's always amazed me, Peter, that I would have thought the EU states themselves would have been pressurizing those at the top to get a deal, because it's in the economic interest of the EU to get a deal. And yet they've very successfully, if they've covered their tracks in this one, they've done it really well. I mean, does Sweden, for example, worry about what's going to happen to Swedish exports to the UK in the event of 31st of December coming and there being no agreement, trade-wise?
Yes, of course, Sweden worries about that. We're a socialist-led country, sorry to say, but that is a fact and has been for some time now. But even the state minister, Stefan Löfven, pointed out after Brexit was a fact that we will do everything to uphold the trade possibilities with UK. And you are actually the second largest country we are exporting goods to, so you are very important as business partners for us. But what I see in the parliament now, of course, in the shadow of the financial multi-financial framework now being voted for, and the pandemic, of course, Brexit has become a little bit into the shadow. It's not been talked that much about it, but from what I can read from the internal newsletters and stuff in the parliament, it appears that the European Union are quite intense trying to get a deal. And they constantly complain then that the British negotiation team are not that enthusiastic.
Yeah.
What's the word? Yeah. They are not that happy for it. So then you don't know what is true either, because that is a house of lies down in Brussels. So you can never be sure on what is true and what is not. But from what they are stating and from what I can read about down there, it is, they say that the European Union is desperately trying to score a deal. And that could also be true, because it's the greatest fear of all for the European Union that you actually would leave without any kind of agreement. And then worst of all is, of course, that you would be successful after doing that. And then there's no point for any country to stay. So I can understand that they are trying to get a deal together. And I hope that the British negotiation team becomes a little bit tougher. They have to go in with the boxing gloves on now, because European Union, I feel, needs UK more than the other way around. Now, UK is much too big as a market for other countries not being willing to trade with. You are too big. There are too many people. You are such a big market.
Yeah.
So I think European Union is more desperate to try to close a deal, not to lose the complete grip and let you wander off and show the world that it was no problem. So it's time for the British negotiation team to put the boxing gloves on and take the fight now, because we are in the end. Now it's time to be tough.
I think actually, further to that point, Bill, from a British point of view then, to just swap it around a bit, I think a lot of British business, that can be big business, can be medium-sized business, and it can be small business across the spectrum. A lot of business people, I know from my own dealings, kind of are looking at this one pretty concerned actually, because business requires certainty. Any business person will tell you that. You've got to have certainty. If you're making plans, you need to be certain what's happening. But here we are in November, and Boris had told us that, it was going to be earlier in the year, and then it was going to be October the 15th. And so British business is, I feel, is in a quandary, because it doesn't know exactly what it has to do. Godfrey makes a point that the big corporations, they're capable of, they can just roll on. It's not lethal to them, but it is lethal to small to medium enterprise business if these things aren't clear. But how is it that Boris has taken this risk with this whole swathe of our British economy, the small to medium-sized business people?
Well, I think Boris has demonstrated absolutely clearly over the last year he doesn't give a damn about small to medium-sized business, because we wouldn't have been having the lockdowns we've had, but that's another story. And I think actually the thing that should have been done to give everyone certainty is the serious and substantive talks should have taken place immediately after the referendum. And I, for one, would have nominated Godfrey Bloom to be our negotiator, because I can tell you, within a day, maybe shorter than that, we would know exactly where we were going to be. And then we'd have had the period of the transitional period, which is, the clues in the name, for us to be prepared for a no deal or whatever there was. Instead, they're playing these ludicrous games of political brinkmanship, which are absolutely irresponsible and silly. It's the way the EU does negotiation. But we should have led this, and we should have simply said, here are our terms, take it or leave it. If they didn't take it, then prepare for no deal. You've got a couple of years to do it in business. Let's crack on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, on that point, George. I mean, do you think that there's been, let's say, a hesitancy at Westminster? And I mean, you've experienced Westminster, so you know how it operates. Has there been a hesitancy, a reluctance to actually do that which, well, Peter and Godfrey and Bill has all said, we just should have told them straight. This is, it's either give us a deal or we're off. Is that just an institutional problem Britain has?
Well, there may be elements of an institutional problem, but this was much more than that. It was a proactive fifth column rearguard action. They were, don't forget, still hopeful right up until the end of last year that they could get a second referendum, that they could stop the whole thing. They were quite confident, millions of them, on their marches and petitions and legal actions and so on. They still felt that they could cheat us out of Brexit altogether until less than a 12-month ago. That's for the reasons that have been adumbrated by others. They had the support of virtually the whole of the mass media, certainly all of the television media, which works in synchronicity with the print media. They had the support of what Donald Trump would call the deep state, the shadow government, the Whitehall, the security services, the banks, the biggest businesses, and so on. If you think about it that way, it's a truly remarkable thing that we sitting around this table, and not that many others, managed to defeat them. We defeated an enemy overwhelmingly better armed than we were. It was truly a triumph for the peasants' revolt. So I suppose I'm cautioning against too pessimistic an outlook, because at the end of the day, we are leaving. And Parliament, I should have mentioned, as part of that litany of fifth columnists, Parliament and its Speaker, Little Bercow, were in open revolt against British democracy, against the decision of the people in the referendum. So we have beaten them all. The way I'll put it, David, is like this. We were 3-0 up at halftime in 2016. The whistle's about to blow. It's 3-2. It takes away some of the sweetness of the victory, but it's still a victory. The points are on the board.
It's still a win, yeah. But that's a good analogy, George, actually. And Godfrey, I mean, that is fair comment. And I suppose to go back to what you said earlier, given the economic state of the European Union in these next couple of years, I mean, that's going to probably further play into all the reasons for the UK detaching itself from that failed entity. My only concern there, Godfrey, is at the moment this so-called conservative government is racking up debt like you know, I don't know, Venezuela, you name it, wherever, out of control spending from Rishi and whatnot. So I'm not sure just how solid our finances are going to be. Do you think that will play into things?
No, we're just as broke as everybody else, and we're broke because we have had incompetent governments now, virtually since the war, who are under the impression you can continue to spend more money than you actually bring in. So they print and they print and they borrow and they borrow. And so we've seen the degradation since 1971 and the advent of the petrocurrency in 1971 when Nixon came off the gold standard. We've seen the dollar spending power reduced from $1 in 1971 to 8 cents today, and sterling is even worse. But Weir Justice really doesn't understand money either, albeit he might be ex-Goldman Sachs, as so many of them are in a rather sinister way, in my opinion. But he feels it's a little bit like my wife and my credit card. You know, she feels he can just well buy whatever she likes because somebody else is going to pick up the tab. We're just as exactly the same. And all governments are the same. They spend and they spend and they print and they borrow. No, we're all broke. We're all broke. America's broke. The United States is completely broke. We're broke. The European Union's broke. And so consequently, now the only thing that worries me, and it worries a lot of people, and it will worry a lot of followers of people on this panel, this talk about this reset. This reset, I'm very uncomfortable with reset. What does it actually mean? Because I think what's going to happen is, because the governments are broke, they're going to have to steal even more money from ordinary people. They can't steal it from the rich because they live on little islands or live in Monaco. They can't get at them. The poor don't have any money. It'll be middle England or middle France or middle Germany that governments steal the money from. So I think we're going to see theft probably in the coming years on a scale which is almost unimaginable and certainly hasn't been done since Roosevelt stole gold from the American public in 1933.
Yeah, interesting points actually there. And actually, Peter, Sweden, which is not which from a tax point of view, I think you guys do pay significantly high taxes with this sort of the socialist nirvana of Sweden. I'm not sure how much higher taxes could go to compensate for that, which Godfrey says. But I mean, do you see that the European Union itself, would you agree with Godfrey? Is it heading for the financial rocks, and does it matter?
I agree with Godfrey. I also said many times that before we will achieve Swexit from Sweden, then the chances are much bigger that the union will collapse by itself. Now, the fact that UK are leaving, that created such a big crack in that house. And then it's also the economy that is the problem. And it's like Godfrey said, every empire has eventually fallen. And I think also the European Union will. They are trying now desperately to uphold the image that we need them. And they are so important for the daily life for every people. I'm sorry, we don't need them. We would save a huge amount of money not being members, and we could trade with the UK and with Germany and the rest of the countries without any problem at all, as I see it. And the argument from the beginning for the European Union was peace preventing and big business. Now it has turned out to something that is completely way out. So, I mean, they are heading for disaster. It's like a train just speeding down the track and going faster and faster, and I will tell you that gravy train is soon over.
Yeah, well, let's hope the sooner the better. But I mean, you know, you are right in the sense of like the European Union is desperate to present an image, and this is something where, to touch on a point that several of the panelists here have made, Bill, the media the media, I've never heard the UK media talk about potential economic problems in the European Union. I've never heard that. And that's because, as has been said, the British media are owned by the European Union, metaphorically, if not literally. And so I mean, if it wasn't for the British media, I think British people would even have had more confidence in demanding an instant exit from the EU. But I put it to you, Bill, the British media continues to be a problem.
The British media is a propaganda tool of the state. There is no question about it. And by the state, I don't mean necessarily just our state. I mean the super state of the EU, of the globalist powers who are trying to bring us all together. These people are not reporting the news. Day after day, you see examples of them putting out there what their own opinions are, and they ignore things. Every day when I was in that European Parliament, we were getting warnings about issues within the EU economy. We were being told to watch out for Italian banks. We saw the Greek thing, obviously. One thing after another going on. I sat on the committee for regional development, and they were putting forward plan after plan after plan, billions of euros of spending, and they didn't have the money for it. So every meeting they sent through a letter saying, can we have more money? These kind of things don't get reported in the British media because it doesn't suit the narrative. And one thing I will say, and it's been touched on earlier, absolutely crucial that the BBC is broken up and privatised. Why on earth should we pay for something that is feeding propaganda against us into our living rooms? So, the whole MSM is a problem, and the BBC is the absolute pinnacle of the problem and should be disbanded.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not exactly a fan of the BBC, Bill, having set up biased BBC back in 2000, so pedigree there of opposing them. But I think just to kind of wrap things up then, so, I mean, George, I think you're probably a voice of optimism in the sense of, I think you're saying that, yeah, it's not going to be perfect exactly, but we are going to be rid of them on the 1st of January. We are out. And frankly, that's something that's worth maybe half a glass of champagne. Yes?
Well, I don't drink alcohol myself, so I won't join you even in half a glass. But if...
it could be slurred.
I would just put it this way. All of what Bill said is absolutely correct. I support him entirely in his analysis of the media, but our political class is so shrunken now that it is unable to surmount that. We should have spent the last 4 years inspiring the people with a vision of a new Britain in the world. We have utterly failed to do so. Nobody has any idea of what life is going to be like for the British in the new world that we're about to slip our moorings from the EU and set sail. Yeah. We should have been building a vision of what that would look like, what our ocean-going Great Britain would look like, where it would reach, how far it could go, what glories it could recover for us. And that has been entirely absent from all of this. So we've been taking all these punches from the media, and the negativity about Brexit has become so overwhelming with no countervailing narrative at all. Yep. Nobody has sketched the vision of what Brexit Britain can be. Now, we're going to have to start doing that from the 1st of January. There'll be no more distractions from the 1st of January. And, our political leaders, whoever they are, I'm not sure that Boris Johnson's that much longer for office. But whoever the new set of leaders are, I pray to God that they can find some magic in their prose. They can paint some pictures with their brushes that will inspire our people to face the future with confidence. A confidence that I'm absolutely convinced is justified. I believe that Britain can be great again once we've left the European Union. But heaven knows the 7 dwarves that are leading our political class need to grow up or be replaced.
Yeah, George, I think that's true. I mean, Godfrey, 1st of January, will you be in the main of a similar mind to George? We will have moved on. It's a fresh dawn, and therefore there's everything to play for.
Yes, I agree with absolutely everything that George has just said. Of course, as everybody knows, I am a drinker, and so consequently,
You can have George's champagne then.
I might have I haven't celebrated I haven't celebrated at all. Not on the night or the morning of in 2016, because I knew what was coming down the road.
Yep.
I knew what was coming down the road. So I have not yet celebrated. And to add, it's not just mainstream media, is it, that have fought the Remain camp? It is the whole of the academic establishment as well. It's not just the media. So we have a lot of young people who've been brought up to believe that it's the Holy Grail, and because having worked down there, and Bill will back me on this. He's actually been out there. What you're dealing with the establishment out there is a religious fervor for the European.
It is indeed. You're right, Godfrey. But Godfrey, unfortunately, the clock has beat us just as you were getting warmed up. So listen, I wanted to thank you all very much for being here. Thanks for being on the stream. Pleasure to see you, Peter, George, Bill and Godfrey, and look forward to seeing you guys again. Many thanks for giving us your time. It's deeply appreciated from Open Dialogists. That's it. Good night.